Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, I have got some great news to share with you today. You have been with me for the last 3 years, along with my amazing producer, Alexa. And I just got word that SiriusXM has offered an extension to my contract with them. So you have me at least for the next year as well. And I really can't express my gratitude enough. This extension is possible because you all listen to the show, because you provide your feedback, your insights, you share the show. It means the world to me. And now you can also listen to us on Substack as well. And it's just building this program, building this platform. And it's showing that these issues of human rights, of media accountability, are issues that people actually care about. They want to be informed. They don't want to just be spoon-fed propaganda that makes them feel good. They want to hear the hard truths, even the uncomfortable truths, even the things that make their skin crawl, because they understand that that uncomfortable truth now is how they ensure safety and security and justice long-term. So thank you for proving wrong the naysayers and proving wrong the folks that think that you need to be bombastic or a shock jock to get your point across. It's exciting that we have now, we're coming up on our 150th show here in a couple of months, and I'm sure we're going to continue to build upon that. So thank you all. Really can't express my appreciation to all of you enough. You are making this possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for continuing to provide your feedback. We have a great show lined up today. Ernest Crim III, your favorite Black history teacher. If you follow him on social media, he's got, I don't know how many bajillions of followers on social media, and his content is just brilliant. It's really outstanding. He's got a great book, Black History Saved My Life, a children's book that we're going to talk about today as well. He'll be on in the middle main body of the show. Before we bring him on, one of the things I want to talk about today is economic justice. We just passed Labor Day, and I don't think that this holiday gets the credit it deserves. It's such a weird thing to say, but hear me out, because there's so much about our economy that politicians like to point at and say, look, we've got a great economy going. We got the stock market rising. We've got, we got the stock market rising. Let's edit that part out, Alexa. We got the stock market rising. We've got, home prices that are going up, and people's equity is going up. This is all great, but we're missing the key dangers of our economy right now. And while we have made progress during the Biden-Harris administration, we're still in a very dangerous spot. James Baldwin once beautifully said, "We have yet to understand that if I am starving, you are in danger. People think that my danger makes them safe. They're in trouble." How many people realize, if you're listening to this right now, how many of you realize that right now Americans are suffering worse economic inequality today than today in 2024 than they did before the Great Depression a century ago? Right? Worse now than before a century ago. And so I want to provide a clearer lens on the actual state of the economy so that we can overcome these injustices. This inequality that was before the Great Depression is what enabled that economic collapse. It was one that Americans didn't emerge from for well over a decade. In fact, it was World War II that got us out of that depression. And so if we want to prevent a similar 21st century collapse, we have to change course quickly. I posted a Substack about this as well that says that cites this chart by economist Emmanuel Saez of UC Berkeley that shows the levels of economic inequality that the top 0.1% has more wealth than the bottom 90%, which is incredible to think about. And we're worse now than before the Great Depression. And you see a flatness of the income inequality from about 1940 to about 1980. And that was good, because when you have that flatness, it shows that there's more parity, more economic parity. More people are getting out of the middle class. More people are getting out of low income into the middle class, from the middle class to upper middle class. And it shows that the wealthy are still doing well, but they're not exploiting people. And then in 1980, we see a major shift, and it's become exponentially worse since then. And we'll talk about why in a second. So I'm going to cover these 9 facts very, very quickly, and then we'll bring on Ernest. But the first one was exactly that we are worse off in economic inequality now than before the Great Depression. Number 2, we're not an outlier by ourselves. We're globally terrible. According to the Gini Index, is a measure basically of economic inequality. The United States ranks last among developed nations on earth in economic inequality. Like, we are the worst offenders out there. In fact, we are ranked worse than Russia and China on economic inequality. What does it say about our economic policies if nations run by autocrats and dictators achieve better economic justice than what our politicians enact for us? And I'm not holding up Russia and China as some standard. They're not. And that's the point. They're a terrible standard, and somehow we're doing worse than them. Fact 3, these so-called right-to-work laws are not just anti-worker, they're also extraordinarily racist. These laws were designed to uphold white supremacy by protecting employers who refused to hire Black and brown people, because Black and brown people were engaging in collective bargaining and unions, and white supremacists said, no, we're not going to allow you to use that to get us. So we're going to have these right-to-work laws where we ban unions altogether. They were crafted to weaken unions, to dismantle collective bargaining, to strip power from workers. Dr. King said this beautifully. He goes, quote, "We must guard against being fooled by false slogans such as right to work. It is a law to rob us of our civil rights and our job rights. Its purpose is to destroy labor unions and the freedom of collective bargaining by which unions have improved wages and working conditions of everyone. Wherever these laws have been passed, wages are lower, job opportunities are fewer, and there are no civil rights. We do not intend to let them do this to us. We demand this fraud be stopped. Our weapon is our vote." Fact 4, if the minimum wage had kept pace with inflation and corporate productivity over the last 50 years, since the 1960s, it would be at least $27 an hour today. An analysis by Dean Baker of the Center for Economic Policy and Research placed this minimum wage at about $27 an hour now. And the fact that we're at $7.25 shows how much money is being robbed of us every single year, every single day. Fact 5, the myth of trickle-down economics propagated by Reaganomics has been nothing more than the scam of a millennia. Since 1980, the Reaganomics trickle-down scam has redistributed $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% of Americans. Remember earlier I mentioned how after 1980 there was a big spike in economic inequality? This is why. It's because they cut taxes for billionaires, raised taxes for working people, and stifled our wages at $7.25 an hour. Fact 6, we have a way to fix this. This is where I was talking about the 1940 to 1980 range. The wealthiest Americans paid a marginal tax rate of up to 94%. Now, let me explain what a marginal tax rate is. A marginal tax rate does not mean that if you're wealthy and you earn $10 million, 94% of that is taxed. No, it means that once you hit a certain threshold beyond $10 million, you're taxed 94%. And the reason for that is nobody needs $100 bajillion. They just don't need it. And we know that because in 1940 to 1980, for 40 years, we had that. And that extra money was then used to build our highway system. It was used to electrify America. It was used to subsidize homes that people bought and built generational wealth off of. It was used to help subsidize the cost of starting small businesses. It was used to ensure that small businesses could pay their workers a living wage. It was used to ensure that corporations wouldn't get these billion-dollar tax breaks. No one went broke. No one left the country. All these rich people have remained exceedingly wealthy. Manufacturing boomed. We witnessed the strongest middle class in US history. Why not return to that? Because, by the way, that was under Republican presidents. So any Republican that tells you today that, no, we need to cut taxes on billionaires so that they can trickle it down is lying to you. That's not money trickling down. That's crap. And that's why we're suffering, because the billionaires are getting wealthier and working people are getting poorer because of nonsense like this. Stop bootlicking billionaires. Start demanding they pay their fair share in taxes. And by the way, fact 7, it isn't just low taxes for billion-dollar corporations destroying working people. It's also massive wage theft. Experts estimate that corporations continue to steal an estimated $50 billion with a B from workers annually through wage theft. By the way, and I'm going to quote Economic Policy Institute Vice President Ross Eisenberger, he reports, wage theft affects far more people than more well-known crimes such as bank robberies, convenience stores robberies, street and highway robberies, and gas station robberies combined. Let me be clear. You take every form of theft in this country, every form, larceny and fraud and grand theft auto and bank burglaries. You combine all of it, it's less than the amount corporations steal from employees. You take all that and combined, and the 50 billion is more. And for low-wage workers, it's even worse. This is in addition to the 50 trillion being redistributed over the last 50 years to the top 1%. Fact 8, we need more labor unions because unions strengthen economic justice. They contribute at least 11% or more in increased annual wages for workers, ensure better benefits and paid time off. They help close the gender pay gap. They help close the racial pay gap. And they protect workers against billion-dollar corporations. Just consider this. This is not just low-income workers we're talking about. Consider that the wealthiest actors and athletes are unionized. Why? To ensure that the billionaire financiers and team owners cannot exploit them. You think Robert Downey Jr. getting $80 million for his next Avengers movie, he's not part of a union? Of course he is. You think, name any professional football player, professional basketball player, baseball player, you think they're not part of a union? Of course they are. They're signing $100 million contracts, $500 million contracts, and they're part of a union because they don't want to be exploited by billionaires. If they're working hard to prevent exploitation by billionaires, despite being 100 millionaires themselves, what do you think corporations want to do to you when you're making $50,000 or $100,000 a year? And fact 9, billionaires don't create jobs, exploit workers by driving out small businesses, driving down wages, and driving up their own corporate profits. 99.9% of businesses are small businesses with fewer than 250 employees. It's not the Amazons and the Walmarts and the Targets and the Microsofts that are running the world. It is the 99% of small businesses that have fewer than 250 employees. Oxfam put out a report that during the pandemic, billionaires gained $3.9 trillion in wealth. And meanwhile, workers lost $3.7 trillion. Do you think that's just a coincidence? Or do you think that's the common sense answer that billionaires are exploiting working people? Let us not forget that the United States is in debt. We are $32 trillion in debt, not because the poor rely too much on welfare and pay too little taxes, but because billionaires pay too little taxes and rely too much on corporate welfare. They then give out billionaire philanthropy, which is great, I guess, but it's a PR move to distract from their tax avoidance. I don't want your $1 billion donation to a charity. I want you to pay your $8 billion taxes that you're supposed to pay. There was an article out there, Jeff Bezos donates $100 million to some charitable hospital. Jeff Bezos, over the last 3 years, avoided $8 billion in taxes, at least, per year. You tell me what you would rather have, $100 million or $25 billion going to social services programs. And by the way, Jeff Bezos giving $25 billion is going to affect him not at all. In the least bit. Not in the least bit. Stop defending billionaires. Stop pretending that they earned it fair and square. In fact, 90% of today's billionaires were born before Jim Crow laws were abolished. Were born before women had equal financial opportunity in this country. Before they were allowed basic financial credit. So stop this BS idea that billionaires earned it fair and square. They started on the 99-yard line in a 100-meter race. This claim that they earned it is one of the biggest shams of our lifetime. It's exploitation. Stop defending billionaires, start taxing them, and start fighting for economic justice in America through unions. Our current economic model is unsustainable. It's unsustainable that 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. It's unsustainable that 1 in 6 Americans are food insecure. It's unsustainable that 78,000 Americans die annually because we don't have guaranteed healthcare as a human right. It's unsustainable that while a universal healthcare model would save Americans $450 billion annually, corporations lobby corrupt politicians to prevent healthcare as a human right. It is unsustainable that Americans have the lowest life expectancy, highest maternal mortality, highest infant mortality in the developed world. This is all unsustainable, and we can fix it. How? By raising the living wage, cracking down on union busters, passing the PRO Act, raising corporate taxes, decreasing taxes on working people, decreasing taxes on small businesses, demand paid time off and universal health care as a human right. So this Labor Day, as you enjoy your weekend and your pension and your overtime pay and many other benefits that unions fought for, remember that this fight is far from over. We must continue to stand strong, unionize, and demand fair taxation of billionaires to ensure that we have a future where we can actually thrive. There is no justice without economic justice, and we cannot relent in our demand for economic justice. All right. Thanks for letting me rant. I appreciate that. I love you guys all. Thank you for tuning in. When we come back from break, we are going to bring on your favorite Black history teacher, Ernest Crim III. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm excited to bring back my good friend Ernest Crim III, a brilliant thought leader in the space, and I got to give the proper introduction to him because he brings a lot to the table. He's a public teacher, an anti-racist educator, a hate crime survivor, a victor, and his big focus is using Black historical narratives to empower and educate through a culturally equitable lens. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. He's a South Side of Chicago native, went to U of I Urbana. I went to UIC, so we're not supposed to like each other. He's a former educator of a dozen years or more who's now taken his education advocacy nationally, globally. He's got a brilliant repertoire of work he's done. If you're looking for an anti-racist educator, I'm going to have Ernest share his content with you, his contact information with you. He's reaching 4 to 5 million people a month. He's created content for HBO, Hulu, Disney, Paramount. And I'm going to stop here because if you know Ernest, he doesn't like his praises being made public. But this is the guy you want. Ernest, thank you for being with us today, brother.
Hey, Qasim, what's up, man? It's a pleasure to be here. I always love being in space with you.
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot we got to talk about. But before we kind of dive into contemporary issues, I really want our listeners to hear from you directly. One of the things that our listeners are accustomed to is that the guests that are bringing on are not just people who talk the talk, but walk the walk. And I remember you sharing your story of the hate crime you experienced and how you've taken that as, I mean, I guess you'd call it fuel to grow your own personal self, but also to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Talk about that journey and how that helped your writing and your education advocacy.
Yeah, so man, I had been teaching for 6 years at the time. I got into teaching because I took a Black history course at U of I, and I was just so inspired by everything that I was not taught growing up. And that course answered all the questions that I had about why my neighborhood was different, why my experience was the way it was. So I decided to teach because I wanted to give that same information back without folks having to go to college and get loans that I'm still paying back now, for instance. But I also wanted us to know that this information could change our entire life. So I have been at that time advocating within the class and doing mentoring programs, but nothing outside of that. But in 2016, my wife and I, who's an educator as well, we dealt with the hate crime while at an event maybe 2 weeks before going back to school that year. And this situation, which involved a white woman who was with 3 other people, 2 of which were Black, surprisingly. She called us the N-word because we grabbed the beanbag we thought she was done using. She kept repeating it. I started recording. And as it escalates, she eventually spits on us. That situation right there, for one, understanding the law, having taught government while I was in class and understanding my history, to say I was appalled, you know, is really falling short on how I really felt. But I expected so much more to be done in that instant. The police she was calling over eventually did throw her out, but understanding that she should have been arrested for what she did and understanding that that should never happen to anybody, it lit something in me. And it made me say that, for one, I have to fight for justice in this situation because like she and nobody else can think this is okay, especially considering that was, if everybody's aware, contextually 2016, July 30th, that was the year Trump was running. That was the year he
Right.
eventually won. Hate crimes were on the rise during that time because of his rhetoric, and they still are. So I felt I had an obligation to serve as a public example of how we can fight these things, because oftentimes we'll feel compelled to fight something physically. And depending on the situation, I get it, but that can't be the only thing we do. This is a lifelong generational thing.
Right.
So from that point, I fought for it. I started writing a book, and I also began to post on social media to help people who deal with similar situations advocate, and also use Black history as an entry point to why we have the issues we have today.
You know, there's a moment, and I've unfortunately experienced similar hate. Fortunately, never had anybody spit on me, but you know, you get called the N-word. I get the sand N-word. It's the racist variety of that. I had a Nazi call me that today on social media. And there's a moment when stuff like that happens in real time where you're like, is this really happening? Where like, this can't be happening. Like, I know this isn't really happening, but it's real. And for me, and I know you got kids too, but you think about, you know, we're fortunate that we have platforms. You've got, you know, close to 1 million followers on social media across platforms. And I see it as not just a burden, but a privilege and an obligation to be able to put out the anti-racist, anti-misogynist, you know, you know, xenophobic content to ensure that the next generation doesn't have to deal with this kind of thing. And I know a lot of the work you do focuses on young children in particular. And there's, you know, a great man once said that nations cannot be reformed without the reformation of their youth. And I think what you're focused on with reaching young children is indicative of that. Talk about that. You know, why go after young children and their development with so much passion, as opposed to focusing on an older generation? I mean, I think I know the answer to that, but I want to hear it, you know, from you on this space.
Man, when I started writing my book, as really it was therapeutic for me. It was cathartic. I wanted to let people know that we deal with these issues not just as a singular hate crime or hate incident, but it's systemic. And I began to reflect on the neighborhood I grew up on, the south side of Chicago, and what redlining did to my neighborhood and my upbringing in the food desert and so on and so forth. And I began to understand that the reason why I was where I was and why I had such a strong mindset culturally was because of my parents, and just the principles they instilled in me and what they taught me, and how they responded to my inquiries. And then when I became a parent myself, it's like now I'm trying to reproduce that on another level with the knowledge I have. I began to understand that, you know, the like going after the racists and going after the bigot. There are some people who do that. I can't remember the brother's name, but he has like talking to clan members and like forming friendships with these folks. But as an educator, I know that the future of not just our nation but the world relies on our ability to raise our kids with empathy and kindness. And honestly, not to use this as a scapegoat or whatever, but like it's truly easier to teach
Yeah.
kids the appropriate thing. And that lady who did that to me was 26 at the time. She was young, like she was
Yeah.
taught that by somebody, and it was
Right.
nourished. So what can we do if we flip it and we teach our kids these foundational principles from all different backgrounds about how to be more accepting? Like when you teach kids who are Black their history, they have more pride, they perform better academically. When you teach non-Black kids, even white kids, this history, like white kids become more accepting, right?
Right.
They're able to deflect these biases and these racist images and things that they might be inundated with in their life. So if we look at the generation we have now, we see the problems that we don't want to exist. We have to start with the foundation, and that's our kids.
One of the greatest assets I've had in my life are brilliant teachers. And I was probably a teenager when I had this conversation with, you know, we called him Uncle at the mosque, but he was a Black and Native Indigenous American scholar. He passed away in 2007, Brother Sultan Abdul Latif. And, you know, he wrote a phenomenal book called Slavery in the African American Psychic Trauma. And he documented the psychic trauma that's been inflicted upon generations of Black people post-slavery, right? There's this myth that slavery, the public slavery ended and then magically the trauma is gone, but he documents it different ways. But what really left me in awe about what he documented wasn't just the trauma inflicted upon Black people, but was about, we often forget about the mindset of the descendants of enslavers that was never really dissipated either, because there were never reparations paid. There was never a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was never an acknowledgement of the genocide of Indigenous Americans in any kind of meaningful way, of Black Americans in any kind of meaningful way. So how does your work address that, right? We've talked about white fragility. We talk about, when you've had privilege your whole life, equality feels like oppression. And there's a dime a dozen. I mean, even now, there's a lot of anti-racist educators out there who are like, I mean, excuse me, I'm just going to be blunt about it, but if there's going to be an anti-racist educator, I want someone who's Black, who's Indigenous, who's kind of had the lived experiences. But I think I read somewhere that the majority of DEI hires at universities are still like white men and white women, which they bring a role to the table. There's nothing wrong with them being there at all. But if you're going to address the structural injustices, the lived experience is a big part of that as well. So how do you navigate that conversation while respecting people's emotions and feelings? I think it's important to do, but not compromising on the need to move forward and build sustainable infrastructures that dismantle the systems of white supremacy that got us here in the first place.
Yeah, I think so I had the opportunity to, as someone who got into education primarily to teach my community, I was given the opportunity to teach kids from all different backgrounds. Like, just because of the very nature of the school I taught at for most of my career, it was Black, it was Hispanic, it was white, it was mostly low income. And I think, even though I had studied it before, primarily through, like, Fred Hampton and with the work he did with the Panthers and the Rainbow Coalition, I knew about the class issues, but having seen it every day opened my eyes to something different. When you see poor white kids who grew up in situations economically way more dire than you could, but then to also see kids from that situation repeat or have some of that rhetoric, like, they might not say it explicitly, but you can tell by some of the questions they're asking that they may be believing some of this right-wing stuff from Fox News. I began to really ponder on that, and what I understood was, and you have to know this to do this work, that we're all products of socialization. Now, yeah, of course, we're products of our ancestors and the cultures and the things we come from and that trauma and all that type of stuff, but we are socialized to be certain ways in this country. Like, this country it's a social construct. Like, this thing could be, we could call it something different tomorrow, y'all. Like, I mean, it boggles my mind how some people like have such an allegiance to something that can be gone just like that, as opposed to all of humanity. This is an ideal that we have. We truly, the love for this country, if you have that, is love for people, like all of us. So I come with through in this saying that all of us are a product of socialization. And I understood through education that I was taught implicitly to believe that not only was I less than white people, but that it was just how it was supposed to be. And when I began to really reflect on it, I was like, dang, so that means that white people are implicitly and oftentimes explicitly, for both sides of us, are taught that they are superior inherently. That's the way it is. So with my education, I try to bridge that gap, especially when I'm talking to like a group of, mostly Black kids or whatever. I have to know they are worthy. And I have to also let white kids know that you're not better than anybody, but I also have to let them know that, there are people who look like you, a lot of people who fought against racism. And I began to even reflect on that, because as a teacher, when we talk about racism and slavery, oftentimes we talk about the same people, like, the Frederick Douglass, the Harriet Tubmans, and people like that. We mentioned Abraham Lincoln, not dissecting how problematic his views were, but we don't let them know that the second president didn't agree with slavery, John Adams. As a matter of fact, his son didn't either. And after he was president, became a congressman who fought against it. And we don't talk about the white folks, the Quakers in the 1600s that fought against it. So I have to say that if you can be taught to believe these roles in society, even though it feels like we're fighting a rising tide, bro, I have to also believe that through proper education, through being intentional, that we can teach people to do better. But it cannot start and end with me. It has to be a complete revamping of society.
Well said. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Ernest Crim III, a public teacher and anti-racist educator. Be sure to follow him across social media at Mr. Ernest Crim. And, I very beautifully said, Ernest. I mean, I've always reflected on, this point that some white people in American history were enslavers and other white people were abolitionists. And if discussing America's history of racism makes you affiliate more with enslavers than abolitionists, well, you're telling on yourself. And it's a red flag. And you should reflect on why that's where you associate. Like, look, I'm proud of my faith as a Muslim. When somebody condemns the Taliban, I don't get offended. I stand right there. I've been condemning them long before you have. What are you worried about? I'm not to sit here and say like, how dare you condemn me? It's like, no, I'm not. And we see Republicans say this today too, that these laws to condemn white supremacy are targeting conservatives. Well, no, they're targeting white supremacy, but what are you admitting to right now, right? I mean,
Right. Hit dogs holler, man.
That's right. That's right. That was, I think, Raphael Warnock said that when in his run for U.S. Senate as well. Let's talk about politics as well, because we're coming up, 60 some days or whatnot, and from the presidential election, and there's a heated debate happening right now, where I think anyone, even people center right, agree that Donald Trump is a fascist and an existential threat, not only to the United States, but globally, right? He wants to tear apart NATO. He wants to, get out of peace treaties. He wants to support, regimes like Russia, and just it's insane stuff. We all agree that this is not a debate about that. The question is, we see some of the domestic policies that are being put forth by the Harris administration that seem to betray the principles, right? We see a much stricter immigration policy that mimics Donald Trump's immigration policy. We see her moving away from universal health care, which disproportionately harms Black and brown people and low-income people, because we disproportionately have lower access to health care as well. We see this, and this is Biden, continued funding of Netanyahu, despite documented evidence he's committing war crimes and genocide and killing American civilians. And so I have a lot of young people, a lot of people of color, who say, look, what's the point of being involved in this space? Because on one side, you got fascism, on the other side, you got them turning a blind eye to genocide. Is this something you've experienced in your conversations, and how do you address it?
Yeah, man. Like as I said previously, when I was a teacher, in addition to teaching U.S. history, I taught governments and scenes for a few years. So I had kids who were preparing to vote and things like that. So my last year in college was when Obama was running. So I had the privilege of voting for him. I was really excited, but also too, by the end of that first term, I was like, man, this presidency, they can't really, because I'm still learning, right? They can't really do what I expect. And yeah, he's letting me down, and it was a lot going on. And
Yeah.
I recall reflecting on that a lot. And even back then, like I had kids who had a lot of questions. And I can say honestly that like I have in my life, I voted third party because I was so disillusioned with Democrats and everything. And but the thing we have to consider, especially with this upcoming election, is there's really only two people that have an opportunity to win. And I think that we both understand that the Democrats should be doing a lot better,
Yeah.
especially as it relates to foreign policy, especially as it relates to the African American community. But I think that as we are now, there's not going to be another option that emerges in the next 2 months that has an
Yeah.
opportunity to stop somebody like Trump. We also too the funding, like the Democrats and Republicans historically are going to receive most of the funding. So where I land on this now is, although the Democrats, like the foreign policy to me is like we can't even tell who's different, but like domestically there are so many differences between these two that
Right.
we cannot overlook. The fact that even going back to Ronald Reagan, I came across this post by a sister named Reese Colbert about how Ronald Reagan appointed a federal judge who was also instrumental in blaming Breonna Taylor's boyfriend for her being killed because he shot at the officers who intruded, right? Who
Yep.
came in his house. So like it isn't just that the president is going to sign a bill or that the commander in chief can pardon people. That's what, or as we see with Trump, like acting like he wanted to give people $1,200 checks by marketing himself, by putting his name on it. No, like
Yeah.
they can make lifetime, not just lifetime appointments. That we're not talking about 4 years. We're talking about talking like they are intending to appoint judges who are in their 30s
Yeah.
who are going to be there, man, could be there 50 years. So we ain't just voting for a president. I think it's important to let people know that we're also voting for a team, and we're not
Right.
voting out of love and admiration. We're voting as a business decision. And also too, it's best in my opinion to vote for the person who would be Kamala, that we can most be more willing to have a discussion with, but somebody
Right.
who's also more willing to listen.
That's right.
Nothing's
Yeah.
gonna be perfect, y'all. But we live through Trump and we know what can happen. So let's put somebody in office that we can at least have a conversation. That's not to say don't protest. That's not to say don't hold them accountable. It's not to say don't be excited about the history that's made. Be happy, be excited, but then say you got to make sure you do this for us too.
I think I heard it well said that vote for you, whoever you think is going to do the least harm, and then haunt their dreams to make sure they do the least harm and do the most good. And the other thing I would add to your thoughtful comments, Ernest, is people got to remember it's not just the president on the ballot. There are dozens of other candidates on the local and state level on the ballot that are going to affect you a lot more than the president. You know, your potholes on your street bothering you, that's a local election. Your school doesn't have the funding it needs, that's a local election. Your city council isn't following through on a traffic light that you need installed to make it safer for your kid to cross the street, that's a local election. And oftentimes we get so disillusioned with the presidential because we feel like it's picking the lesser of two evils. And we forget that in doing so, we undermine our own local success. And guess what? The more involved we are locally, that's how we promote candidates to go on the state, on the federal level and whatnot. I mean, Tim Walz, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of Tim Walz. I think he was the right pick. I mean, this guy was a high school teacher, right? I mean, he was a school teacher. I mean, Ernest, you could be our next vice president, right? I mean, and I say that out of sincerity, not as an even you, but I say that out of sincerity in that by the folks who promoted Tim Walz locally are now reaping the benefit of having a contact literally entering the White House. And so that's what I tell folks, that as disillusioned as you are on the federal level, I'm not going to sit here and lecture you and tell you not to be. And I think you said it beautifully. Protest, make your voice heard. Let them know that you're upset, that you're angry, and don't relent in that protest. And don't do yourself the injustice of not voting on the local level as well. Because when you do yourself the injustice of not voting on the local level, you prevent the opportunity for there to be a more just candidate in the future. And that's, you know, to your point, that's where we get stuck with judges like this knucklehead who's trying to accuse Breonna Taylor's boyfriend of her own death, when in fact he was just defending himself when the cops refused to identify themselves as well. Ernest, we're
Can
down to
I
our
add
last.
this real quick?
Yeah, please go
Just
ahead.
really
Go ahead.
quick, because I
Yeah,
want to echo that. It's so dangerous, man, to tell people not to vote.
yeah,
You know, and it's because of everything you just said. Because I understand being disillusioned with the presidency and electoral college and all of that. But when you tell somebody not to vote, the assumption then is, okay, well, I shouldn't vote for the Congress. I shouldn't vote for the Senate. I shouldn't vote locally in the state General Assembly. I shouldn't vote for my city council. Who, by the way, most of our city councils, at least where I live, they don't even have political parties, right? So, like when we tell somebody don't vote, it's like telling somebody just grind, grind, grind. Don't sleep, don't sleep. No, be real. We need sleep, right? You're telling somebody keep fasting. No, like you got to eat eventually, right? So
right.
we got to make the appropriate decisions and understand that these things are all connected. It ain't just the president. It's your city council. It's your county exec too.
And if you're not finding the right people locally, then go look in the mirror because that's the right person. Then go run, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Ernest, we're down to our last couple of minutes. I want to ask you two questions, and then we got to close it out. The second question is, I want you to share how folks can get in touch with you, especially if they want to support your content, invite you out to speak at their company, at their school, at their place of business. And so I want you to share all that. But first, I love this quote you have, this African proverb you have posted on your LinkedIn. If you don't know who you are, anyone can name you. And if anyone can name you, you will answer to anything. What does that mean to you?
Man, for me, it means that when you are faced with a situation like I was with the hate crime, you understand that that person who's calling you that word or treating you that way on a systemic level is merely projecting their own insecurity. It's not a reflection of you. Another quote that I love is, especially for Black folks, is nothing's wrong with you. Something happened to you. That's important for us to understand. I always tell my kids that if they deal with anything at school. So, and even from an anti-racist lens, for white folks who are trying to figure this out, they want to get involved. Like, you have to know who you are. Even like the whole white thing, like who are you culturally? Who are you ethnically? You were taught to be a part of this American thing, and at the expense of your European identity. You are maybe German, Italian, and you are also committed to being anti-racist. So we have to know who we are. Otherwise, we'll follow behind anybody and respond to anything. And also, too, for anybody who wants to follow me, of course, at Mr. Crim III on TikTok, Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Full name. I'm on Threads, YouTube. You can book me at ernestcrim.com. That's ERNESTCRIM.com.
Ernest, thank you for being with us, brother.
Appreciate you, Qasim. Thank you.
As Mr. Ernest Crim III, a brilliant thought leader in the space. I cannot recommend him enough. He is somebody you need to follow, you need to support. Look, every dollar we spend is a reflection of the kind of future that we want to create. And I encourage you, especially if you're a business owner, to invest in Ernest, because he is building that kind of future that's more inclusive, more compassionate, and more committed to justice. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Mr. Ernest Crim III, a brilliant anti-racist educator and hate crime survivor. Cannot recommend him highly enough. He is a brilliant thought leader in the space. Check out his books, check out his resources. Be sure to follow him at Mr. Crim III on social media. I want to close out by spending a few minutes talking about these charges filed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland against Hamas. He charged Hamas with terrorism. And I want to address this because there seems to be a lot of confusion of what's going on here. And if we want to be a country of laws, we need to be honest about applying those laws. Look, I made clear back on 10/7 that Hamas committed war crimes by targeting and killing civilians. And I state this again to preempt the inevitable complaint that I haven't condemned Hamas in the last 15 minutes. On September 3rd, AG Garland charged 6 Hamas leaders with terrorism, and he narrows it down into 3 main categories. 1, for killing American civilians, 2, for kidnapping American civilians, and 3, for helping fund Hamas. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense to me, right? I mean, I'm glad the DOJ is pursuing those who commit these acts of violence and terrorism against the U.S. and its citizens. It's an obligation upon any sovereign nation to go after the people who are killing and kidnapping their citizens. My question is this: when it comes to Palestine and Israel, why is the DOJ stopping with Hamas? If the DOJ wants to ensure its own legitimacy and instead uphold actual justice, it has to stop this hypocrisy of selective safety and security for the American people, and instead prosecute all war crimes. And its current failure to do so is indefensible, and nobody in legacy media is talking about this. Let's talk about killing the American people. On May 11th, 2022, Israeli soldiers killed prominent journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. A detailed UN inquiry concluded, quote, "The commission concludes on reasonable grounds that the Israeli security forces used lethal force without justification under international human rights law and intentionally or recklessly violated the right to life of Shireen Abu Akleh." Shireen was a U.S. citizen. She was Christian, if that matters. It should matter, because we hear the MAGA right talk about how Christians are under attack. Here's a Christian American that was killed. Yet more than 2 years after her brutal murder, the DOJ has refused to take any action whatsoever or even provide an update. Sarah Leah Whitson, who's executive director for Dawn, a media company founded by the late Jamal Khashoggi, who was also assassinated by a regime that the U.S. refused to hold accountable. She wrote to Garland in late July. She said, "Perhaps the DOJ thinks that we will forget about the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, as well as the investigation it promised the American people 2 years ago. But we have not. The DOJ should take responsibility for its apparent failure to make progress in this investigation, which has fueled Israeli impunity. leading to the systematic and widespread killing of Palestinian journalists, at least 108 since Abu Akleh's killing in 2022. Whitson's statement is not hyperbole. In fact, she's pointing out that hundreds have been killed since then, and the DOJ has refused to investigate. So they charge Hamas with terrorism for killing American civilians, but no charges against the Israeli government for killing American civilians. Okay, that's the first hypocrisy. Let's talk about Jacob Flickinger. In April 2024, multiple targeted Israeli strikes killed Jacob Flickinger, a World Central Kitchen aid worker and a U.S. citizen. Since then, the DOJ has neither filed nor contemplated any charges against the Israeli military for this brazen murder. The UN has made clear that the ICC considers intentionally directing attacks against personnel, installations, material units, or vehicles involved in humanitarian assistance as a war crime. Instead, the NPR report on this issue said that while the DOJ has been moving quickly, their words, to hold Russia accountable for possible war crimes, when asked about Jacob Flickinger, the department declined to comment. So on what grounds can Garland unequivocally condemn Hamas for killing American citizens, yet remain silent on the Israeli military killing American citizens? It gets worse. Let's talk about kidnapping, right? Because Garland charges Hamas with terrorism for kidnapping American citizens. The horrific kidnapping of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, which you're all aware of because his parents spoke at the DNC. Well, in February of this year, the Israeli military raided the homes of Barak al-Agha and Hashim al-Agha. Barak is only 18, Hashim is 20, detained them in Gaza, and then sent them to Ashkelon prison. That was the last anyone has heard from either brother. They're Chicago-based, by the way, U.S. citizens. No charges have been filed against them. No trial date has been given to them. No access to counsel has been granted to them. No one of their families knows where they are or what's happening to them. These are two American citizens being illegally detained in a foreign country's prison without any justification, charge, or reason to hold them. It is, by any logical definition, a kidnapping of American citizens. Yet, since February, the DOJ has provided no update and no insight whatsoever, has made no demands to get them released or figure out why they're being held. And given the horrifying and well-documented fact that the Israeli military is torturing and raping prisoners with impunity, it is outrageous that AG Garland has remained silent on this horrific situation. And by the way, this hypocrisy doesn't stop here either. Garland charges these Hamas leaders for funding Hamas. Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. They have been since 1997. And again, it is the obligation of a sovereign nation to protect their civilians against this kind of attack. So my question is this. Garland says that his charges against Hamas are in major part due to, quote, extensive funding for the Hamas terror ring. Not controversial. Criminal accountability for funding a designated terrorist organization has long been part of American legal jurisprudence. The next logical question, though, is when will AG Garland file these charges against Netanyahu for helping fund Hamas? And this is not hyperbole. Netanyahu has himself admitted to this. In an article published by the Times of Israel on October 8th, no less, Tal Schneider writes, Israel has allowed suitcases holding millions in Qatari cash to enter Gaza through its crossing since 2018 in order to maintain its fragile ceasefire with Hamas rulers of the Strip. Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Smotrich, who is now the finance minister of Netanyahu's party, made a similar point himself in 2015. And then Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019 when he was quoted as saying that those who oppose the Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is not yesterday's news. AG Garland has had plenty of time to process this. For at least the last decade, Netanyahu has explicitly and knowingly helped fund Hamas, openly propping up Hamas as the Times of Israel reports to undermine peace. So if Garland can charge Hamas leaders with terrorism for funding Hamas, why is he silent on Netanyahu's explicit policy to undermine the Palestinian Authority and prop up and fund Hamas with suitcases full of cash? These are not anecdotes, my friends. For example, last February, Israeli terrorists killed 2 American citizens in the West Bank, both children. But aside from empty words of condolences, there's been no accountability, none whatsoever. No charges, nothing filed whatsoever. The precious lives of Shireen Abu Akleh and Jacob Flickinger and Barak and Hashim Alecha and many more American civilians kidnapped or killed by the Israeli military are no less valid than the precious life of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was held hostage by Hamas. These lives have equal value, but the grotesque double standard additionally undermines the U.S. Claims of being a just arbiter. A recent report was just published in Dropsite News that Hamas accepted the U.S.-Israel ceasefire and hostage release proposal on July 4th, fully accepted it. And then the U.S. allowed Netanyahu to continue to bomb Palestinian civilians indiscriminately, despite having accepted the ceasefire terms. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco concluded her remarks in that press conference with this phrase. She says, "We will not rest until all those who kidnapped or murdered Americans are brought to justice." Perhaps, just maybe, somebody can inform the DOJ that the American families mentioned above are, and many more like them, are still waiting for that justice. And that justice should apply whether the people kidnapping and assassinating them are Hamas or the Israeli government. That's what justice would call for. All right, my friends, thank you for tuning in. Thank you all for subscribing, for listening on Substack. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to bring this content and make sure there's media accountability, that there's meaningful human rights, and that you have the insights you need to ensure we're holding our elected officials accountable. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. We will continue to advance this show built on compassion, justice, and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in live, same time, same place at 10 a.m. on Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern, here on SiriusXM channel 126. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. It's been a wonderful 3 years with you. I can't wait to start this next year with you as well. God bless you. Peace.